liberty. The Freedom for Ajalan campaign was launched in the UK Parliament in 2016 by Unite and GMB, and we're now supported by 15 national trade unions, including the TUC and partner organisations. Our campaign has two chairs: Unite's head of international solidarity, Simon Dubbins, and the Labour Party peer and former General Secretary of the NUT, Christine Blower. The reason we have two chairs is a man and a woman, is for deference and respect to the Kurdish people's movement, who have ensured women are at the heart of political and social power by adopting a co-chair system. Really importantly as well, the women chairs can only be elected by the Women's Committee, so there's no interference possible from the men. The campaign found its genesis as we watched in disgust as ISIS lay siege to a town called Kobani, which is a Kurdish majority town on the Syrian border, incredibly close to the Turkish border. You can see from Turkey, you can see Kobani. As ISIS was, and we'd already seen the atrocities that ISIS was capable of, we knew what was going to happen in Kobani. And so we were absolutely horrified when Turkey did nothing. And in fact, it did worse than nothing. They were actively stopping Kurdish people living in Turkey from making the very short journey to aid friends, family and neighbours across the border. And later on, there would be very credible reports that would suggest Turkey had gone much further than this. And it was in fact actively supporting and arming the so-called Islamic State. We were again horrified by Turkey's later aggression against the canton of Afrin, which again is in northern Syria. And sadly, that was just a precursor to the humanitarian crisis that we've just seen ramp up and unfold across the region as a result of the invasion by Turkey last October, who are using jihadist proxies in north and east Syria. And that was after obviously Trump gave them the green light to invade. They call it Operation Peace Spring, and it's been nothing of the sort. It's effectively been an ISIS rescue mission. So we would hopefully what I hope to explain through this presentation is that the belligerence has deep roots in the Turkish political system and its founding doctrine. So the people currently threatened by Turkey's war in Syria and in Turkey itself, the Kurds, take as their inspiration the politics and writings of Abdullah Öcalan, who's the man you can see on the placards held up by Francis O'Grady, many other trade union general secretaries there in front of you. Öcalan has been imprisoned in horrific conditions for 20 years by the Turkish state in an attempt to stifle aspirations for Kurdish liberation and identity. Öcalan and his freedom are fundamental requirements for a meaningful and democratic peace in the region. All the other issues we're going to discuss here flow from and are connected to this one injustice. So the Freedom for Ajalan campaign is part of a long and proud trade union tradition of international solidarity. The trade union movement victoriously campaigned to free Nelson Mandela in South Africa, the Cuban Miami Five, and most recently, Lula in Brazil. And we believe that Öcalan's release would be as transformative for the Middle East as Mandela's freedom was for South Africa. So it's because of this, our rallying cry has become, yesterday Mandela, today Öcalan. So before we can understand the modern situation, we've got to, before we can understand the current circumstances in the region, it's essential to first understand the history of the Kurdish people in the last century. The Kurdish people are the fourth largest ethnicity in the Middle East and arguably one of the largest stateless populations in the world. There are roughly 40 million Kurds globally, with the majority living in southeastern Turkey, west and northern Iran, northern Iraq and northern Syria. Their statelessness is often referred to as the Kurdish question. To understand how the Kurds became stateless, we have to acknowledge the redrawing of borders by the Western Allies after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire at the end of the First World War. Initially, a Kurdish state formed part of the 1920 Treaty of Sèvres. However, just 3 years later, the Treaty of Lausanne set the borders of modern Turkey, leaving the Kurds with minority status in their respective countries, paving the way for a century of persecution. The Turkish Republic's founding principles were ethno-nationalist. The very existence of Kurdish identity, culture, and language have been brutally repressed by the Turkish state. The use of Kurdish language, traditional dress, folklore, and even names were banned, and Kurdish inhabited areas lived under martial law until 1946. In an attempt to deny their very existence, the Turkish government categorized Kurds as mountain Turks until as late as the 1980s. State-sanctioned and often perpetrated massacres punctuate Kurdish history in Turkey. One notable example being the Decem massacre, which took place between 1937 and 1938. The Republic's army used aerial bombardment and poison gas to put down a rebellion. Thousands were killed and displaced. According to the Decemi, tribesmen were shot after surrendering, and women and children were locked into hay sheds and burned alive. Now, Kurdish sources record the total killed in this one incident at 40,000. Most recently, the Turkish state has used militarized police and tactics of collective punishment against entire towns in the predominantly Kurdish Diyarbakir region. And it is using a policy of cultural genocide to systematically destroy Kurdish archaeology and cultural sites, echoing ISIS and its vandalism of Syria and Iraq. Given all of this, it's very easy to understand why the Kurdish people have a well-used saying: we have no friends but the mountains. This picture you can see here on the right-hand side, this is a place called Diyarbakir. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's been it was an important site for the Romans, for the Assyrians. I mean, it's of immense cultural and archaeological and historical import. There was a riot against the government here, and so the Turkish state sent in tanks, and you can see what they did. They flattened it. I mean, this would be like if there was a protest in York and our government sent tanks into York and just completely leveled the place. So moving on to modern day Turkey, in an increasingly oppressive regime, since the attempted coup in 2016, state of emergency laws are frequently abused to persecute political opponents. Political activists, academics, and trade unionists face repression and prison time. The head of the left-wing pro-Kurdish People's Democratic Party, HDP, Selahattin Demirtas, has been imprisoned awaiting trial for spurious terrorism-related charges since 2016. And this is typical of Turkey's treatment of Kurdish politicians. If you're Kurdish and you become elected in a fair election, the Turkish state will almost immediately label you a terrorist and put you under house arrest or throw you into prison. It's a fact of life for anyone who wants to be involved with politics and has a Kurdish background in Turkey. Zehra Dogan, who is a Kurdish journalist and artist, was sentenced to nearly 3 years in a Turkish jail for painting a picture of the state's violence against the aforementioned Diyarbakir region. In 2018, Erdogan ordered militarized police to shoot tear gas, water cannons, and plastic bullets at peaceful protesters in Istanbul, many of which were women in their 80s. They'd been peacefully holding a vigil until the state would tell them what happened to their disappeared children. Turkey has the dubious honor of being one of the world's 10 worst countries for workers, and this puts it in the same category as places like Colombia and Guatemala. In September 2018, construction workers at the new Istanbul Grand Airport went on strike to protest against dangerous working conditions, which had already led to 42 deaths. Security forces cracked down on the workers and arrested over 400 and detained 25, including the president of DISK, which is the Progressive Union of Construction Workers in Turkey. Just a few weeks later, Abdullah Karacan, the man you can see pictured on the left, he was the general president of the Rubber and Chemical Workers Union, and he was assassinated while visiting union members at a Goodyear factory in the city of Adapazarı. The Turkish state continues to oppress its Kurdish population, with militarized police using brutal tactics of collective punishment against entire towns in Kurdish regions. Once the Turkish state has perfected strategies to oppress the Kurds, it extends them to trade unionists, socialists, academics, and human rights activists. So who is Abdullah Öcalan? And how does he fit into this history? So Öcalan is the recognized leader of the Kurdish People's Movement in Turkey and beyond. Excuse me. He's become a symbol for the Kurdish people's aspirations for freedom from political and cultural oppression, and the standard bearer for democracy and peace. In 1978, the Kurdistan Workers' Party was formed as a national liberation movement to resist the tyranny that I just described. Abdullah Öcalan quickly emerged as its ideological and political leader, and by the 1980s, to most Kurds, Öcalan had become a symbolic figure for Kurdish resistance against the oppression of dictatorships and military regimes, annihilation and genocide. At his urging, women's freedom became a significant issue within the organization and also within Kurdish society. By the 1990s, the Kurdish People's Movement was focused not only on Kurdish identity, but on gender equality and women's freedom. In 1998, whilst traveling to South Africa at the invitation of Nelson Mandela, who had offered Öcalan amnesty, a clandestine alliance of secret services abducted Öcalan and handed him over to the Turkish state. Since that time, he's been held in what's called aggravated isolation on Imrali Island in the Sea of Marmara. Turkish governments have frequently approached Öcalan because they recognize his crucial role in the search for a peaceful solution to the situation. Even the current Erdogan government maintained secret negotiations with him for 2.5 years. And during that time, Öcalan proposed a step-by-step plan for achieving peace and a permanent political solution to the Kurdish question. Since his capture, Öcalan has endured mostly solitary confinement on Imrali Island in the Sea of Marmara. On the 29th of June 1999, Öcalan was charged with treason and separatism and sentenced to death by a state security court, which consisted of 3 military judges specially convened on the island to try him. They created an entirely new legal framework just for one man. So they used an extrajudicial process in order to try him. So this arrangement existed entirely outside of their existing legal framework and, importantly and crucially, Turkey's international obligations. The European Court of Human Rights has ruled that Turkey has violated Articles 3, 5 and 6 of the European Convention of Human Rights. These are the articles that cover freedom from torture and inhuman or degrading treatment, the right to liberty and to security, and the right to a fair trial. His imprisonment and isolation also contravene the UN-mandated Mandela rules for the ethical treatment of prisoners. And the Council of Europe's Committee for the Prevention of Torture has expressed serious concerns about his lack of contact with the outside world. From July 2011 until December 2017, his lawyers had filed more than 700 appeals for visits. Every request was either ignored or rejected on often spurious grounds. The confinement of Öcalan is as much about trying to isolate his ideas as it is about separating the man. It is an attempt to bury his ideology of peace, democracy, and liberation. The ideas of Öcalan, many of which he used his written defense to articulate and develop, are being put into practice in a bold, radical experiment in grassroots democracy in northern Syria. The Syrian authorities pulled out of the majority Kurdish northeastern region in 2012 in the wake of the Syrian civil war, and this created a space for Öcalan's ideas to be implemented. Into this vacuum, the Kurdish community and its allies have been able to put into practice the political philosophy of Abdullah Öcalan. They've built a functioning, democratic, pluralist, and feminist society in Rojava, the Kurdish name for Western Kurdistan. This vision of a better world they call democratic confederalism is now threatened by the Turkish invasion and the machinations of Trump, Assad, and Putin. This progressive society built by the Kurds is unique in a region where the oppression of women has been rife for thousands of years. The Kurdish regional government, or autonomous area of northeast Syria, has more women participating in it as elected politicians, committee members, chairs, and council members than both the US and UK combined. The high level of political emancipation and involvement, combined with the now famous Women's Protection Units, or YPJ, who were on the front lines defending Rojava against ISIS, has meant this flourishing democratic society has earned the title of the Women's Revolution. The military wing of this project, the Syrian Democratic Forces, have acted as the ground force in the fight against ISIS and have sacrificed more than anyone else to defeat and contain them, losing 11,000 men and women in combat. The fascism of Turkey regards this project as an existential threat, and so first invaded Afrin using jihadi mercenaries in 2016, and more recently, after being permitted by Donald Trump, hopes to complete the project by completely remaking the demographics of the region with a full invasion. The first action as part of Turkey's so-called Operation Peace Spring was the rescue of ISIS fighters by bombing the prison camps in which they had been contained in admirably humanitarian conditions by the SDF. The military actions of Turkey and its proxies has resulted in a humanitarian catastrophe, as hundreds of thousands of civilians have attempted to flee the region. Turkey has used banned white phosphorus bombs on civilians, which cause horrific burns. Its jihadists have summarily executed countless civilians, including the Kurdish politician Hevrin Khalaf. And now, in this chaos, we face the resurgence of ISIS. And finally, just as COVID began to affect the region, Turkey attacked the Aluak water station. Aluak supplies water and electricity to 500,000 people trying to cope with a global pandemic in a war zone. Using water supply as a weapon of war against civilians is a war crime. So why freedom for Öcalan? Well, we believe that Öcalan is the fulcrum around which politics in the region move. If we want allies that believe in democracy, pluralism, and the liberation of all people, if we want peace, if we want justice, then we have to work with the Kurdish People's Movement and their leader, Abdullah Öcalan. The values of Öcalan and his followers are our values. They are the values of the trade union movement. And if an injury to one is an injury to all, his followers desperately need our support. Öcalan has repeatedly and unilaterally called for peace in the region and has a detailed, practical, deliverable roadmap to achieve this. It is a testament to his unique position and authority that the Turkish regime has secretly negotiated with Öcalan based on this roadmap. During these negotiations, our allies in the country told us calm and hope had returned to Turkey for the first time in decades. Erdogan abandoned this strategy of peace and returned to repression and state violence when he realized that this path was unpopular with his far-right racist base. Erdogan abandoned this. It is nothing short of remarkable that a functioning society that is inclusive of all people and has the enfranchisement of women at its center exists in northern Syria. And without Öcalan, this couldn't have happened. We can allow dictatorship and division to swallow the region again. Or we can build on our legacy of solidarity with Colombia, Palestine, and Mandela and support a progressive, peaceful project in an area that has known only chaos, sectarianism, and death. This project benefits not only the Kurds, but also Arabs, Turkmen, Chaldeans, and countless others who live inside it. And I think the strength and power of this pluralism are clear from the words of an Arab tribal leader who lives in this democracy. I can think of few other individuals who benefit more than the status quo of patriarchy. And yet, when asked by a French journalist if he could speak on behalf of Arabs about Rojava, he said, "I cannot speak for all Arabs because I do not represent all Arabs, but I can try humbly to speak on behalf of humanity. The women's revolution must be defended." So why a trade union campaign? The Labour movement has a great and proud tradition of international solidarity and in educating and mobilizing millions of workers. The trade union movement is the biggest social movement in the world, and it played a critical role in making the calls to release Nelson Mandela mainstream. And we need that now. We need it to gain justice for the Mandela of the Middle East. And what has that solidarity meant for us? Well, through the support of our trade union affiliates, we've been able to resist and counteract the lobbying of the Turkish embassy, which has tried to block us on multiple occasions, including when we hosted a cultural event at City Hall in London. It's helped us to successfully lobby governments such as the Welsh Assembly and Holyrood, as well as support the activities of the Labour Party chair of the all-party parliamentary group on North East Syria, Lloyd Russell Moyle. It's given us the support we needed to get a motion which called for all trade unions to affiliate to and support our campaign, which was passed unanimously at the 2017 TUC Congress. We've been able to send cross-party delegations to Turkey and Rojava, which has allowed us to gain really vital on-the-ground knowledge and understanding. We've had a huge and significant presence at several trade union events, such as the Durham Miners Gala, which gave us the privilege and honour of being the International Solidarity theme in 2018, and last year's Tolpuddle Martels Festival, where we held a very successful panel, but we also had a main stage speaker, and I'm pleased to say the largest and most well-organised block on the march itself, which I think was quite a shock for some people, seeing 300 Kurds descend from around Europe, but the hospitality, the warmth of the welcome really had a profound effect on everyone involved. At the 2019 TUC Congress, you can see on the right-hand side here, sorry, the left-hand side, we were able to organise an incredible solidarity action where every delegate held up a placard with Öcalan's face, and we immediately got a flurry of phone calls from Kurdish community centres and community groups from around the world. Many of them moved to tears by this show of solidarity. You have to remember, this is a people who think that they're a forgotten people. They think they're isolated. They think they're alone. And seeing this, that was really, really important. That was really significant. So, and finally, I mean, the support of the trade union movement allows me the luxury of speaking to people like you up and down the country. It's the invitations to come and speak at these trade union meetings to build the awareness that are the lifeblood of our campaign. So how can you help? Well, sorry, here's some pictures from this isn't 2018. This is actually last year's Durham. With our block, this is the Tolpuddle Martyrs march last year as well. Here we are mustering before setting off, and this is where we are today. So these are all the national trade unions who've affiliated. But how can you help? Well, we'd encourage you to, if anything that I've said has moved you, then please do consider affiliating this meeting to our campaign. If your local branches from your own trade unions haven't yet affiliated, please consider asking the secretary to. I'm happy to come and speak at another meeting over Zoom, or hopefully under better circumstances in 6 months' time, or whenever it is, when I can actually go and speak to people in the flesh, as it were. Invite someone to come and speak and affiliate your own branches as well. Please use your channels to support the campaign. We're very active on Twitter. We have a campaign website. Sign up for our newsletter. It's not been as prolific this year, but we'll be ramping that back up again in the new year. And if you sign up for the newsletter, I've got a lot of links that I can post in the chat after I've done this talk. And we have as well, like we produce a lot of content on YouTube now. So we have semi-regular podcasts as well. So if you like to listen to podcasts, we've got a new one where I speak to experts on the region, and we really get a context of all the different news stories that are happening and link them together. And that's a really, really sort of useful way to understand exactly what's going on. And I just finished by saying the Labour movement must speak out for the Kurds. We must support them in their ongoing struggle against tyranny in the countries that they live in, against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. And we've got to support the Kurds in Turkey. And that means demanding an end to the state violence, for a restoration of peace negotiations, which must include as a first and vital step the just release of Abdullah Öcalan. Championing the rights of trade unions in Turkey is hugely important. Civil society organisations, journalists, elected representatives, they must all be allowed to exercise their democratic rights. If the Kurdish people believe that their only friends are the mountains, then comrades, it is our responsibility to be those mountains. Thank you very much for your time.